everybody. Welcome to Medicine and Science on the Pod TV network. I'm Nick Pellavita. I shall be your moderator for today's show. And today's show, we're going to discuss something very interesting that everybody needs to know about, and it's called the measles. Now, most people know about the measles because you may have had it when you were a child. But since then, it was eradicated by a thing called vaccines. And so people didn't worry about measles because we all know that's gone because of the vaccine until now. And then what happened? Apparently, we have a ton of unvaccinated people and people who have died because they didn't take the vaccine, mainly out of West Texas. For people who don't know in the United States, hopefully it's not in your country. And what's really a problem is there's a vaccine that can actually stop the measles, but there's somebody in our federal government who said, no, it's the vaccines that cause the measles, which defies gravity. It's like somebody saying that gravity doesn't exist. So it becomes very confusing because we have some people out there in the US government right now who know nothing about infectious diseases and certainly isn't board certified in internal medicine. But we do have one here on our program. We're bringing in right now Dr. Michael Patmos, who's a real medical doctor, as opposed to the ones who pretend to be out of Washington, D.C. So Dr. Patmos, hopefully you as a real medical doctor can shed light on what's going on in the measles, and we don't have to listen to the pretend experts out of Washington, D.C. who said the statement, oh, I think it's the vaccine that created the measles. I'm going like, you cannot be serious. But let us know what's going on here.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Rick. Good morning to all the viewers. It's great to be back with you again after a couple of weeks where I was unable for various reasons to participate. My mom has been quite ill and actually just recently passed away. So I was a little bit preoccupied, but I'm back and happy to share correct information with the audience. So let me just say that, to try to put this in perspective, people have to understand measles was eradicated from North America. It was declared gone. And, when we say that, what that means, the measles virus exists only in people. It exists because we maintain it. We house it. We provide it a safe haven. We provide a refuge for the virus to exist inside of us. If nobody has it, then the virus is eradicated. It's gone. It doesn't exist. And we were, hopeful that we could eradicate measles around the world, and then the disease wouldn't exist anymore. That's what we did with smallpox. We were able to vaccinate essentially everybody on the planet and eradicate smallpox. Viruses that are found in humans and in other animals like bird flu, that's a different matter. But if you have a virus that just exists in people, it is theoretically possible to eliminate it from, if there's no host keeping the virus alive, then there's no place for the virus to be perpetuated. It's not perpetuated free in nature. It's perpetuated inside a human host. Measles was declared eradicated about 25 years ago at the turn of the century because we had managed to vaccinate about 95% of people. With vaccination, the higher the rate of vaccination, the more you're depriving the virus of a safe haven. So it's extremely important to try to vaccinate everybody that you possibly can, everyone who's appropriate to be vaccinated. There's a small percentage of people who shouldn't be, but most everybody should be vaccinated. And the higher the vaccination rate, the better. Well, we had a very high vaccination rate. It was upwards of 95%. And that has pardon me, I might be sneezing here in a second. That has declined in, excuse me, I have a little cold. That has declined in recent years because of Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy has been the global leader of the anti-vax movement for 20 years. His organization, Children's Health Defense, is the global leader for anti-vax activity. the World Health Organization named the anti-vax movement to its top 10 list of the most dangerous things for public health, along with war, famine, and drought. The anti-vax movement is up there with war, famine, and drought as far as being dangerous to public health. That's what the World Health Organization said. Robert Kennedy is the global titular head of the anti-vax movement, and he has been for 20 years. Now he's in charge. And because he's been actively for years, this is not new, he's been out there for years urging people not to get vaccinated. And he's had a powerful effect. He's got a very well-run organization with a lot of revenue. It's very active on social media. It is the single largest source. His organization is the single largest source of false information on social media about vaccines, Children's Health Defense. So Robert Kennedy is the one who's been depressing vaccination rates around the world. And he is the one who is ultimately responsible for the resurgence of measles around the world, which is now happening in Europe and other places. We're having the worst year for measles in a long time. And in the United States, it's back. It was gone, essentially gone for 25 years, and it is now back. So how many, and like you pointed out, there's been, when you talk about how many people die of measles annually around the world, hundreds of thousands of people die. This is not a benign illness. It's not just a childhood rash. This disease kills people, and it ruins people neurologically. It has a complication called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, which destroys people neurologically. It can leave you permanently with seizures and cognitive impairment, and just basically ruins your brain. So this disease is no joke. Well, in any case, it's back now. It's back in the United States. It popped up recently in West Texas and has now been found in New Mexico and also in Louisiana. For a total of 15 states right now have reported measles. The reported number of cases is over 300. Now, here's a very important point. Reported cases always underestimate the actual number. Why is that? Why isn't the reported cases the accurate number? It's because sometimes doctors don't report these cases. If you're a doctor and you see a patient with measles, you have to report it. You're supposed to report it. Excuse me, guess what? You've got to stop your workflow. You got patients waiting in rooms. You're an hour behind, and you got to stop your workflow and fill out an 8-page form, which you have to send to the, so that a lot of doctors don't have the time to do this reporting. Hospitals will report it because they have people that's their job. But in a doctor's office, doctors don't have time to report these cases. So the actual number is far greater than what's reported. So we have 300 reported cases, but I think there's many more, and here's why. We know that there's been 2 deaths already from measles, one in West Texas and one in New Mexico. The death rate for measles is about 1 in 1,000. About 1 for every 1,000 people who gets measles, 1 will die. We've had 2 deaths. What that means is that this outbreak must have at least 2,000 cases. So I think there's about 2,000 cases of measles out there, maybe more. There's probably more deaths because people may die and the doctor may not know what they died of and may not associate it with measles. So they must think it's just a rash, a viral exanthem or something. So there's far more cases than we know because things are underreported. And there's another aspect to this that I don't know for sure, but I have a suspicion, and I really wish that somebody would look into this. If you remember, last year, there was a measles outbreak in South Florida, and the Florida Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, told parents in Florida, if your kid was exposed to measles, don't worry about it. Let him go to school. It's okay. That was insanity. No infectious disease doctor in the world would ever say that, because one person infected with measles is likely to infect 18 others on average. So one person infects 18, each of the 18 infect 18 more. What's 18 times 18? Big number. And then you keep multiplying that by 18, and you get a sense for the logarithmic way at which measles spreads. So I think when the measles outbreak occurred last year in Florida, and we talked about it on this podcast, and I predicted it was going to spread because Ladapo didn't quarantine people. So people took measles from Florida and they took it to, guess where? Neighboring southeastern states like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas and New Mexico is right along the southern tier there. I think that this outbreak in Texas could very well have been seeded by the outbreak last year in Florida. Measles doesn't pop out of thin air. It doesn't fall out of the sky. It happens because a person who's infected reproduces the virus and spreads it to someone else. It's spread by person to person. So measles didn't just appear in Texas. It was introduced in Texas by someone. And we know that Florida seeded Louisiana. So that's now there's a way to figure it out. You can actually do subtyping of the virus, and it can actually see whether or not the current measles virus is related to the one in Florida. And that would be great to know because I have a suspicion that it is. So what happens now? Okay, it's only March. This is a very contagious disease. Depending on where you live in the United States, vaccination rates are very low, like in Idaho, where people are against vaccination. Can you explain that to me? I don't understand that, but Idaho has a vaccination rate like around 65% or something like that, really, really low. Other states, little, smarter states have a higher vaccination rate. And it also depends on zip codes and demographics and so forth. But suffice it to say, we are under immunized country. And we are vulnerable because of it. So there's these people who are under immunized or unimmunized. They think of them as a host. They're like a hotel that's got availability. They're available. They have rooms available for the virus. So if the virus comes their way, they welcome the virus into their bodies. They host it. They keep it. They replicate it. They make more of it. They make mutant strains of it, and then they spread it to everybody else. So this measles outbreak is going to spread. It's going to get worse. It probably will run throughout the year. We're already at 300 reported cases, maybe 2,000 actual cases. We're going to end up at the end of the year with thousands of people with measles, and there will be more deaths, and there will be people who will be permanently damaged from this. Meanwhile, Robert Kennedy is minimizing it. He said, oh, measles, this happens all the time. And, it's basically a benign disease. And, the vaccine kills people. No, it doesn't. The vaccine causes measles. No, it doesn't. Vitamin A has been shown to help mitigate symptoms of measles in places in the world that are vitamin A deficient. The United States isn't. So vitamin A is not a treatment for measles. It's not a prevention for measles. Kennedy's out there giving wrong information, incorrect information. It's tragic. And so, this is on him. This is his baby. He's the anti-measles vaccine guy. He's been, around the world, it's discouraging measles vaccination. We've got measles resurgence. It's the Robert F. Kennedy phenomenon. Kennedy is ultimately responsible for this worldwide measles resurgence. And for the people who are going to die of it, Kennedy is the one who's responsible. So that's my comments for today. Apologize for being a little under the weather, and I'll be happy to entertain questions, and we can chat more about this.
Yeah, I was looking at the statement, and we're going to bring Rick Rosner in, who said that he thinks it was the vaccine that created this measles outbreak, which I'm not going to say it's the stupidest thing I ever heard, but it's pretty high up there. So, Rick, I don't know, was that a doctor who made that statement?
I haven't researched who said it. But yeah, there are plenty of idiots saying every idiotic thing possible. And very sorry for the loss of your mom. That sucks, no matter how old you are when it happens. It's always terrible. So I looked at the measles outbreak map, and Texas, New Mexico, west of the Mississippi. But most of the states this year that have had outbreaks are east of the Mississippi. So just because you're in New York City doesn't mean you're safe. So my question for you is, my wife and I are in our 60s. Last time we were vaccinated was 50 plus years ago. If this thing really starts getting traction, will people our age, would it be smart for them to get because,
So that's a great question. I get asked that often. So measles vaccination gives you about 97% protection against the disease. And that protection is said to be lifelong. Like most vaccines, the antibody titer, when you get vaccinated, you get antibodies. They appear in your blood, and there's a titer, an amount. Well, the antibody titer will decline slightly over time. And some people who don't understand immunology say, oh, that means that the vaccine is failing. No, the titer may decline, but the lymphocytes remember how to make more antibodies, and they can make more antibodies anytime. So the reality is, if you were vaccinated, and you had 2 vaccines, you had the full scheduled vaccine 50 years ago, you're probably have high levels of immunity and you're not at great risk. If you wanted to get a booster, that's perfectly fine, perfectly reasonable to do so. I was not vaccinated against measles as a child because I was born before there was measles vaccine. I had measles as an infant, and my mom, God bless her, took care of me. I had measles, I had mumps, I had chickenpox, I had German measles. I had all of these things as a child because there were no vaccines then. I remember my mother taking me to get polio vaccinated when I was 5, and how excited she was because she knew other mothers whose children had gotten polio and had to be in the iron lung. And I can still remember my mom taking me for a polio vaccine. So I wasn't vaccinated against measles, but a couple of years ago, when I was working at Maui Memorial Hospital, they said, we want you vaccinated. I said, okay, fine. So I had the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, even though I had measles and I had a high antibody titer against it. So I think it's not going to hurt anything. It just will give you a little more immunity. But
one more question. Certain viruses, COVID particularly, and flu seem to be worse for older people.
Yes.
Now, measles, is it more dangerous for a kid or for an oldster?
That's a common perception people have, that, oh, it's the old. They're the young. If you're young, like Kennedy says this, if you're young and you're in good health and you eat granola and lift weights, you're going to be fine. Some viruses do preferentially kill the elderly, but not all viruses. Some viruses go after young, healthy people. Most of the deaths from the Spanish flu in 1918 and 1920, 50 million people, were young, healthy, strong men. Does rabies care about how healthy you are? Rabies will kill you whether you're healthy or young or old and unhealthy. So does Ebola care? Does HIV care? So this idea that only old people have to worry about targeted, we have to target our efforts against the vulnerable population. That's bull. The reality is many viruses attack the young, attack the healthy. They're not all just attacking old people. Measles is bad for children. It can be bad for adults too, but it is certainly bad for children.
Hey, Dr. Patmos, just really quickly, I had a question similar to what Rick asked and everything. I think I asked you this before.
Oh, you froze up there a little bit.
Your mother and everything like that, and my sincere condolences of you losing your mom and all along those lines. I'm fortunate to have both of my parents in their 80s, even though Dad's been going through some health concerns, and Mom's actually got a health appointment. I think the week after Mother's Day and everything. But it's some regular stuff that she's been going with her skin care and everything like that. But how important is it? And do you think that people in general are keeping records of those old vaccinations? Because I know for a fact that I think it's my dad, ironically, that has those records, but I think he still has the records of my vaccines and all along those lines. And I don't know where he has them, but he still got some of my report cards as well and everything. But I was just wondering, how important is it to keep those kind of records? And as you were talking about, and this is the second question, you were talking about HIV and AIDS. I know that was a major crisis in the 80s and the 90s. Are we totally out of that crisis, or is that still something that people should be concerned about? And is it only limited to certain populations?
No, HIV, anybody can get HIV. It has certainly put you at greater risk if you have intravenous drug use or you are sexually promiscuous. That, the more people you come in contact with, the more likely you are. HIV is still out there. If it wasn't for the development of the HIV medications, for which Anthony Fauci deserves the credit, he was responsible for the treatment of HIV. HIV would still be ravaging the world. It's still out there. The reason why it has simmered down and we don't see as many HIV deaths as we did back in the 80s and 90s is because we have medication for it nowadays. And you look at Magic Johnson, he's been walking around with HIV for decades. He looks great because he's on the medications that
Plus,
Fauci
it
invented.
turned him into a billionaire. He had to quit playing basketball. He had to go into business, and now he's one of the richest guys in LA.
Yeah. So yes, HIV is out there, but with what the government is doing now, they've shut down the support for HIV treatment in developing countries, which means that it's going to rev up again, and it puts us at risk. These people are so stupid; they don't realize these are There's a reason they're called contagious diseases. They're spread from person to person. If you allow HIV to go wild in Africa, because you don't care about people in Africa, guess what? You're going to care because it's going to come to the United States.
Yeah. Hey, just really quickly, and this is something similar and along those same lines. I have become a fan of a popular TV show. Ironically, it's a medical TV show and everything. And it brought up a ailment that it impacts a certain community. It's actually the African American community and everything, and it's sickle cell anemia and everything. But in the case of Watson, they were talking of, which is the name of the show, and it's kind of based loosely on Sherlock Holmes and Watson. They were talking about this notion that there are sickle cell cures that are out there, but unfortunately, some of the cures are highly expensive and all along those lines. So I just wanted your take on that, because that was one of the episodes where there was like this doctor was going to do a procedure, and he kind of like bent the hospital rules in order to do the procedure, because if you did the regular procedure, it was cost prohibitive for some people.
So, I always say doctors need to stay in their area of expertise. I am not a hematologist, so I am not the most expert person. What I know about sickle cell is that it is a genetically transmitted disorder. It's a genetic disorder of the hemoglobin molecule that causes the cells to stack on themselves when certain things happen, like people get an infection. Their cells will sickle, and then they will get, like stacked on each other and form like a sickle shape. And they get stuck in the capillaries, and that's how you get sick. Sickle cell, there may very well be treatments. This is way out of my area of expertise. I really can't say.
So I have a question that's only semi in your area.
Okay.
And it's based on a semi-crackpot theory of mine. So you mentioned the flu of 1918. And people say 1918 through 1920. It really kept going after 1920. It's just that people decided to quit, the way we are with COVID. COVID's over. COVID's not over. This is the beginning of year 6 of COVID.
That's right.
But so that flu definitely affected people's brains. It caused encephalitis. There's a decent De Niro movie about the whole thing. So if you look at the 25 years after 1920, when, a third to a half of all humanity got this flu that could mess up your brain, it was one of the most violent and dysfunctional periods in history. You've got fascism in dozens of countries. You've got the KKK in the US. You have a depression, and then you have capped off with World War II. Do you think that the flu predisposed humans to be stupider and more violent and contributed to this horrible period? And are we subject to the same thing because COVID, which has infected a third of humanity, affects your brain?
So I can't. So here's what I do know. Parkinson's disease is highly likely in people who survived the influenza pandemic of 1918 to 1920 were highly likely to develop Parkinson's disease later on. There's an extremely strong association. In fact, I had read, I don't know if this is true. I haven't read this in a while, but I had read in some medical journal somewhere that people who survived that influenza all end up with Parkinson's disease. Of course, most of those people from the 1918 influenza epidemic are gone now, but they all developed Parkinson's disease. It does cause, when you get a viral infection like this, it can do permanent damage to the brain. Measles does that. COVID does that, and influenza can do that. There's lots of viruses that damage your brain. Viruses aren't a good thing. And, getting a virus to get natural immunity, well, you run a pretty big risk of having something terrible happen, like dying or having a long-term consequence. I don't know what accounts for I did read a thing the other day that the level of intelligence of humans is declining.
Yeah.
And obviously it is declining in the United States.
Yeah.
All you have to do is just read what people are
just read the
saying.
newspapers and everything. Hey, Dr. Padman, along those same lines, I know we're wrapping up and everything. How, because we had a conference at the Cultural Center that I work at and everything, how concerned are you about a rise in blood cancer? Because I know that I did some work with LLS, which is the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, and did some fundraisers for them last year. And I think, maybe a couple of years ago, for a friend of mine that was running for Man of the Year. And then the event that we were talking about, I think they were talking about melanoma, which is also a blood cancer as well. So how concerned are you about a rise in blood cancer in our society?
Okay, so the cancer, there's a lot of misconceptions about this. Cancer has a variety of causes. Radiation from the earth, natural radiation from CAT scans contributes to cancer risk. Certain chemicals, benzene and other petrochemicals, exposure to those increases cancer risk, especially bone marrow cancer. Viruses increase cancer risk. In fact, the first cause of any cancer was actually caused by, it was the first noted cause was caused the Rous sarcoma virus was the first virus ever identified to cause cancer. Certain chemicals, teratogens, can cause cancer, but by and large, most cancer is actually caused by oncogenes. We have genes in our DNA. We all do. It's been estimated that some significant percentage of our genetic DNA, with the DNA we carry in us, is made up of oncogenes. These are genes that they're not part of making us human. These are probably of viral origin that inserted into our DNA from infections generations past. It's passed on down the line, and you inherit these oncogenes. Most cancers are genetic, and they're programmed. We are programmed to self-destruct. What happens as we get older is we are programmed to age, and we're programmed to self-destruct. Yes, certain chemicals and certain other lifestyle, tobacco, smoking, and so forth, increases the risk, but a lot of cancer is genetic. I am concerned about, we've made a lot of progress treating cancer. There's so many cancers now that are treatable and curable, and when people live so much longer. Look at breast cancer. Oh my God, women with metastatic breast cancer now live years, and they used to die in 2-3 years. Now they're living 5, 10, 15, 20 years. We've made so much progress. But yes, I am always good because we have an aging population. And as people age, those oncogenes are going to kick in. And when they kick in and the biological clock says, you know what, Michael, you've lived long enough. It's time to self-destruct. That's where a lot of cancer comes from. Melanoma is caused by sunshine. That's a simple one.
Hey, Dr.
And
Padman.
speaking about living long enough, and
mentioned
the show has gone on long enough because we're at the half an hour. So I do want to say thank Dr. Michael Patmos, who's board certified in internal medicine, Rick Rosner, and Mark Lee. And we want to thank our viewers in the United States and around the world. Measles is dangerous. To my knowledge, you can go blind and have brain disease. And you got to treat it real carefully. When I was a kid, they isolated you in a room where was completely dark because it had a real propensity to blindness. So got to treat it seriously. If not, it's going to be really bad for you. But I want to thank everybody. We'll see you next week on Medicine Science. Bye-bye.